Up next in the broadcast, hope springs anew for the resumption of the stalled six-party talks after Pyongyang's latest peace offensive. But how long must we wait until we see real concrete steps from North Korea? And in anticipation of her state visit to China later this week, President Park Geun-hye vows to boost bilateral relations with Beijing and push the issue of denuclearization of North Korea. And amid strained relations, South Korea and Japan have allowed a $3 billion currency swap to expire. This still leaves for emergencies $10 billion from a fund with an all-time high of $70 billion. Late Night Edition starts now.
Where's the best place for bibimbap?
Les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver se dérouleront-ils à Pyeongchang?
هل أنتم حقاً سابع أكبر مصدر في العالم؟
この歌手は誰ですか？你好，最近哪部电视剧的人气最旺？
Korea is attracting interest from around the world. The more you know, the more you want to know. Dynamic Korea.
Welcome to the program. I'm Sean Lim, and this is Late Night Edition. We start with the latest in North Korea, where hopes are brewing for resumption of the stalled six-party nuclear talks. Our foreign affairs correspondent Hwang Sung-hee tells us about North Korea's gestures that indicate its willingness to return to dialogue.
With North Korea's recent efforts to engage in dialogue, speculation is running high that the members of the six-party denuclearization talks may soon return to the negotiating table. Pyongyang first sparked hopes for dialogue last month by sending its special envoy Choi Ryong-hae to Beijing, who, during a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, conveyed North Korea's willingness to return to talks. Shortly after Choi's trip, North Korea made a surprise proposal to South Korea for government-level talks, saying it was ready to discuss a wide range of humanitarian and commercial issues. When plans for inter-Korean dialogue collapsed, the North offered to hold high-level talks with the United States. In its proposal, Pyongyang said the two sides could seek ways to secure a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. North Korea then sent its Vice Foreign Minister and Chief Nuclear Envoy Kim Gae-kwan to China, who again implied Pyongyang's willingness to return to the six-party talks. Kim is expected to soon visit Russia for a similar purpose. While the other six-party member nations, South Korea, the U.S., Japan, China, and Russia, welcome North Korea's change in stance, their affirm Pyongyang must come with sincerity this time around. Following a trilateral meeting in Washington last week, the top nuclear envoys of Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo agreed they will no longer hold talks for talk's sake, and that Pyongyang must abide by its international obligations. And while China has been taking a tougher stance on North Korea, Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to deliver a strong message to Pyongyang when he meets with South Korean President Park Geun-hye in Beijing this week. Some experts say the six-party member nations will get down to business next month following the ASEAN Regional Forum in Brunei, where the foreign ministers from the six countries are expected to attend. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
On the diplomatic front, President Park Geun-hye has vowed to do her best to further strengthen South Korea-China ties during her state visit to Beijing this week and to persuade North Korea to sincerely engage in dialogue with the international community. During a meeting with her top secretaries on Monday morning, the president said Seoul and Beijing should work more closely to achieve the goal of denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. President Park emphasized the significance of the upcoming bilateral summit with her Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, as it is the first between the two leaders of both countries, and considering the situation on the Korean peninsula as well as the current state of the global economy. On this Tuesday, it's been 63 years since the Korean War broke out and split the peninsula into two. For years following the war, the North Korean military was superior to that of the South, but as our Chi Myung-gil reports, times have certainly changed.
When the Korean War broke out in June 25, 1950, the South Korean military was far less prepared than the North to wage war.
South Korea had limited heavy machinery. We had no tanks, and we had to throw hand grenades and carry out suicide attacks to destroy North Korean tanks.
Backed by the Soviet Union, the North military was far superior to the South. By 1950, North Korea had nearly twice as many soldiers as South Korea. The North also had more than 240 tanks and 200 fighter planes bombers, while the South had none. 60 years later, the South Korean military is now ranked 10th in the world, while the North Korean military is ranked 20th. North Korea still has more soldiers than South Korea, but its military is presumed to be operating with outdated equipment and a lack of supplies. North Korea also has more fighter jets, tanks, and warships than the South, but South Korea has more high-tech precision equipment. Analysts believe the North relies on weapons of mass destruction such as nuclear warheads and chemical and biological weapons to cover the deficits in its military.
North Korea continues to develop long-range missiles and highly enriched uranium and plutonium to overcome the weaknesses in its conventional weapons capacity. This all started to develop with the start of the Sungun, or military-first policy.
South Korea, meanwhile, has continued to bolster its supply of reconnaissance equipment and ballistic missiles and boost its intelligence-gathering activities. 김영길, Arirang News.
While hundreds of thousands of families separated by the Korean War have left an indelible scar on the nation's psyche, and the clock is ticking for those who are still alive and hoping for a reunion. Our Moon Gun-young was in Berlin to take a look at lessons from Germany's similar history.
Although more than 2 decades have passed since the fall of the Berlin Wall, remnants of it still stand in different parts of the German capital. For tourists, it's a must-see travel spot. For New Berliners, it's a part of history. For those who lived through it, it's a reminder of a sudden event that altered their lives forever. Along the Bernaustrasse, we met Reinhard Hummel, a former West Berliner, who vividly remembers the day 52 years ago when he overnight found himself separated suddenly from the love of his life by a concrete barrier 3.6 meters tall. Reinhard, however, was able to see her on occasion.
I would go to East Berlin from time to time, about once a month on a one-day visa.
On August 13, 1961, the communist government of the German Democratic Republic built a concrete wall topped with barbed wire between East and West Berlin. For the next few years, no humans would cross it. But that changed in the late 60s after the West German government implemented a new foreign policy towards the East. Change through rapprochement and a policy of small steps.
It was part of our policy to perform a real human policy in the interest of the ordinary people in both parts of the divided country. And the result was the unification.
For the hundreds of thousands of people who were allowed to visit loved ones after years of forced separation, these small steps were highly significant.
I was separated from my family for 25 years. Then I was able to file a request to move to the West in January 1985 and was given permission to leave East Germany in December that year.
The German experience is the closest historical precedent for the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Now, that doesn't mean that it provides a direct template for the two Koreas, but experts say there are some useful lessons that the Koreas could learn from the German experience. Moon Gun-young, Arirang News, Berlin.
A former South Korean foreign minister was reportedly sent to Laos earlier this month as a special envoy to ask for the country's cooperation in dealing with North Korean defectors. According to Yonhap news agency, Yoo Myung-hwan met with Deputy Prime Minister and the foreign minister in mid-June to discuss ways to make Laos a safe route for the transit of North Korean defectors to South Korea. Following Yoo's visit, 20 North Korean defectors who were being sheltered at the South Korean embassy in Laos were able to make their way to the south quicker than expected. Seoul has been mobilizing diplomatic resources for the safety of defectors after a group of 9 young North Koreans were forcibly repatriated to the north via Laos and China in May. South Korea and Japan have decided not to extend a soon-to-be-expired won-yen swap deal worth $3 billion. The Bank of Korea said Monday that the two sides have agreed to let the bilateral swap line expire on July 3rd. Seoul and Tokyo signed a deal worth $13 billion in 2008 in response to the global financial crisis and temporarily expanded the swap line to $70 billion back in 2011. But after the deal expires next week, the two countries will only have a $10 billion currency swap agreement signed with China and South Asian countries under the Chiang Mai Initiative. Meanwhile, the representative of global central banks has called on governments to bring about reforms for sustainable economic growth as their monetary policies have fallen short of original expectations. Our Lee Ji-yoon has more on their call for no more stimulus.
The Bank of International Settlements says governments must do more to speed up reforms to grow their economies instead of relying on their central bank's monetary stimulus. In its annual report Sunday, it also suggested that central banks should plan exit strategies and not let fears of disrupting markets stop withdrawing cheap money. It said cheap money makes it easier to borrow than to save, easier to spend than to tax, easier to remain the same than to change. Although central banks' monetary stimulus programs are aimed at getting their economies out of the global credit crisis, it pointed out that ultra-low interest rates have actually resulted in even more debt. Central banks in Europe, the U.S., and Japan have cut rates to virtually zero, and they even took to buying their government bonds to keep long-term borrowing costs low. The BIS concludes the era of cheap money must draw to a close and that it's time for their governments to solve their economy's structural problems to return them to sustainable growth. Last week, the U.S. Fed said it intended to ease its bond buying program later this year, sparking market volatility. And experts say that such volatility might signal a realization of the challenges facing some of the world's biggest economies. Lee Ji-yoon, Arirang News.
As Asia turns out the lights, get full coverage of the day's events on the Korean Peninsula. Late Night Edition with Sean Lim. From North Korea to tech and innovation, catch up with those who know Seoul before the next day begins. Late Night Edition.
Moving on to the latest developments in the case of Edward Snowden, the former government contractor who leaked top-secret U.S. surveillance information, the Ecuadorian Foreign Minister Ricardo Patino Aroca, in a news conference on Monday morning local time, said that Ecuador had received Snowden's asylum request and that they're considering it. He added that the country will act according to the framework of human rights and international law. Snowden, meanwhile, who was widely expected to be on board a flight from Moscow to Cuba on Monday evening, did check in but was not on board. In India, authorities are still reeling from devastating flooding that hit the north of the country last week. Hundreds have died while thousands of others are still stranded in a region in the Himalayas. Kim Hyun-bin has more on the ongoing rescue efforts.
Bad weather is hampering efforts to bring the thousands of people stranded in the northern Indian state of Uttarakhand. Heavy rain and dense fog kept rescue operations at a standstill Sunday before clearing out enough for efforts to resume later in the evening. Troops in some areas are working on putting makeshift bridges in place to lead people to safety.
Many people are still stranded over there and they're being rescued slowly. I think damage worth millions has taken place.
More than 600 people have been confirmed dead in the monsoon flooding and landslides over the last week. Although the death toll is expected to eventually surpass 1,000, India's disaster management minister Yashpal Ayya said on Sunday that he believes the final tally could be as high as 5,000. This year's monsoon rain is believed to be the heaviest in 80 years, and on top of the human toll, more than 10,000 hectares of cropland are believed to have been damaged. The Indian Army has deployed more than 8,000 troops alongside paramilitary forces to the disaster region. The nation's disaster response force is also using drone aircraft to find survivors in some of the more remote areas that remain inaccessible. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Taking you now to the port city of Incheon, just west of Seoul, the host city for next year's Asian Games will get a chance to test its facilities at this year's Asian Indoor and Martial Arts Games, a week-long event that kicks off on Saturday. On Monday, the Athletes Village opened to the 2,600 athletes from 43 countries who will compete in 12 events, including kickboxing, dance sports, billiards, bowling, and chess. The Games Organizing Committee is utilizing a variety of local venues for the event, including the Global Campus in Incheon's Hongdo District, which is the site of the Athletes Village. And it looks like you'll be able to enjoy your smartphone applications at a much faster speed very soon. SK Telecom, Korea's leading mobile service provider, is set to begin the era of Advanced Long-Term Evolution, or LTE-A, as early as this Wednesday. The latest wireless communication service stands to be twice as fast as the current LTE service. Officials at SK Telecom say that although the release date hasn't been fixed yet, the LTE-A service will likely be commercialized by the end of this week. And in time, Samsung Electronics is likely to unveil its advanced version of the Galaxy S4 that's tailor-made for LTE-A. Many credit Korea's rapid rise during its development years to the Saemal, or New Village movement, and it's attracted the attention of other developing nations. Our Kim Hyun-ji reports on a parliamentary delegation from Ethiopia that found itself in Gumi, North Gyeongsang Province for a lesson on transforming society.
Korea is an active exporter of its unique development model called Saemal-undong, translated as the New Village Movement. The Saemal movement is a bottom-up rural development project that was adopted across the nation in the 1970s. Its core values are diligence, self-help, and cooperation. Saemal aims to change the way people think, to improve living conditions in villages, and to increase income. The birthplace of the Saemal movement is Gumi, North Gyeongsang Province, the southeastern part of Korea that is home to the nation's major industrial complexes today. Gumi is also home to the Saemal Globalization Foundation, which has dispatched Saemal leaders to villages of Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Rwanda, to name just a few. On Monday, a delegation from Ethiopia's House of Representatives visited Gumi. Speaker of the Ethiopia House of Representatives, Abdullah Gemara Dago, says Saemal has been adopted in 5 villages since 2010 to eradicate rural poverty.
Already the model is started. This model is very important in different regions in Ethiopia, and we expand that model to other rural communities.
Since the start of Saemal, the villagers have built water reservoirs for farming, paved new roads, and launched education programs for women and children. All these were possible because Saemal-undong has imbued a can-do mindset in people.
Rather than giving materials, we let them know how to develop their own community in cooperation with villagers together, and also rather than depending upon others, develop their own faith by themselves.
The Ethiopian delegation met with a group of Ethiopians who came to Korea for Saemal leadership training in Gumi. Kiros from the village of Maimekden says he's thrilled about the positive changes in his country.
I am happy. I feel happy because almost the people is changing now, just like the Koreans. we began to change our people, so that I feel happy.
김현지, 아리랑 뉴스, 구미.
And SJ standing by for the late night edition of World Sports. Hello there.
Hey, what's going on, Sean?
SJ, let's begin with the big news from the Korea Football Association. They finally named their new head coach for the national team.
That's right, Sean. It really didn't come as a surprise that the new head coach is, of course, Hong Myung-bo. Now, Hong will be leading the team for at least the next 2 years through the 2014 Brazilian World Cup, followed by the Asian Cup in Australia. While the new head coach did express gratitude for getting the nod, he knows it'll be a tall task, trying to set the team up with just a year left until the start of the World Cup. Meanwhile, the former Olympic team head coach led his team to a bronze medal finish in the 2012 London Games. Now moving on, this next piece was overshadowed by the Hong Myung-bo announcement, but still deserves to be one of the top news stories of the last 24 hours as Park In-bi took home yet another trophy, winning the Walmart Northwest Arkansas Championship. But the victory didn't come easy as the South Korean had to battle it out with another South Korean, Yoo So-yeon, who took her to a sudden death playoff. But after playing out the hole, Park ousted Yoo, finishing off with her 5th title this season, tying her for the most titles in a single season for a Korean golfer. At the same time, the 25-year-old will hold on to her #1 ranking for the 11th straight week. And moving on to KBL, no baseball on Monday, so let's take this time to check out the current standings. Now, taking a look at the table here, first off, the Samsung Lions remain in first place with a 1.5 game lead over the Nexen Heroes, with the LG Twins staying red hot as they sit in 3rd place, with the Kia Tigers who are riding a 9-game winning streak right behind them at a half game back. Meanwhile, at the bottom half of the league, the Lotte Giants slowly climbing up, sit in 5th place, with the Tucson Bears still in 6th place, despite sweeping the weekend series against the Hanwha Eagles. And once again, no change with the bottom 3, with the SK Wyverns, NC Dinos, and the Hanwha Eagles in 7th, 8th, and 9th, respectively. And finishing things off in the majors, LA Dodgers lefty Lee Hyun-jin is set for another start as he hopes for his 7th win of the season, but won't come easy with the San Francisco Giants coming to town. With the game taking place on Monday night local time, it's a rematch of Lee Hyun-jin's first major league start against the 7-4 Madison Bumgarner. However, with the 26-year-old pitching against the Giants for the 3rd time this season, he hopes to finally get a win as the defending champions have been responsible for 2 of his 3 losses this season. Now, best of luck to him, and that wraps up the late night edition of World Sports. This has been SJ. Have a great night and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Hi everyone, Kwon So-ah here with the latest weather update on this Tuesday, June 25th. And it's the day that marks the 63rd anniversary of the start of the Korean War. So let's all take a moment to remember those who sacrificed their lives. And if you're going to attend any outdoor events, listen up for the forecast. Jeju Island is going to be under the effects of the monsoon front once again beginning in the afternoon, and so will the south coast regions at night. While the rest of the nation should stay mainly dry, there are chances of some pop-up showers in the inland regions due to unstable conditions in the atmosphere, including in the capital Seoul, as we can see here. And this tends to happen due to the hike in temperatures during the peak hours. So let's take a look at those temperatures. 30 degrees for Seoul, so another hot one, but much cooler down in Gwangju and Busan. And if you take a look at other places, no 30s on our chart here, but 28 degrees for Daejeon and cooler on Jeju, Dokdo, and Mount Kumgang. And now let's take a look at what other parts of the world can expect on this Tuesday. Starting off in Tokyo, where monsoon season is in full swing with scattered thunderstorms expected on Tuesday, mainly in the morning. Meanwhile, the floods and landslides caused by the early and extreme monsoonal conditions in northern India are raising the death toll, especially in Uttarakhand, and more rain is in store, and the same goes for New Delhi this Tuesday too. In the southeast, meanwhile, it's the air causing trouble, with Malaysia having declared a state of emergency in several parts of the country due to the smoke pushing in from Indonesia's Sumatra island caused by land clearing fires. Meanwhile, down under, you'll have some rain in both Perth and Sydney. As for North America, there are chances of severe thunderstorms in Montreal as well as Chicago. New York and Washington, D.C. may have some isolated ones with very high temperatures. In South America, it'll get wet in Sao Paulo. Rio de Janeiro will just be very cloudy. Some sunny spots are going to be Santiago and Buenos Aires, with both topping out at 16 degrees. A hot week is in the picture for Moscow. Temperatures won't be rising much in Berlin. Very hot and sunny far south in Madrid. While those in Cairo will have to cope with the extreme heat another week. Far down in Cape Town, it'll be quite chilly in the mid-teens with winds, showers, plus chances of thunderstorms. And that's the forecast for now. If it's dry where you are, stay hydrated. And if it's wet where you are, stay dry.
That's Late Night Edition from us at this hour. I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.